Hello and welcome to The Study Files, the podcast run by Lancaster University's Learning Development team. Each episode, we focus on a specific area of academic skills, and this week, we are focusing on report writing. My name is Sarah. I'm a learning developer. I work mostly in the management school, supporting students with their study skills, particularly academic writing. And today, I'm joined by one of our wonderful writing mentors, Rafael. Rafael, can you tell us a bit about yourself?
Sure. So first off, hello, Sarah. Thank you very much for having me today. And hello to the audience. I am Rafael, and I am currently a fourth-year master's student. I'm studying data science, and I also did my bachelor's here in Lancaster studying analytics.
Thank you. So today, we're going to be talking about writing reports, and specifically writing reports for university assignments. And Rafael will very kindly be sharing some of his experiences, and you've had a lot of experiences of writing reports, and some of the things that he's learned along the way. And we hope that this will give you some insights and some strategies for your own report writing. So, Rafael, to start, can you tell us when you first started writing reports?
Sure. So all the way until university, until my first year of university, I had not been presented to reports. In high school, I had only been accustomed to writing essays. And then on my first year at university, in my very first written assignment that I was given, it was to write a report. So that was quite a challenge because, as you may know, and as we will explore on today's podcast, it was definitely different to the structure of an essay and the structure of a report. And I remember that I went to this class that was taught by one of my lecturers at the time, and he helped us understand the difference between reports and essays. He conducted one class at the end of the term, the last class of week 10 of the Michaelmas term, and he explained to us what was expected from us. And up to this day, I'm really grateful that I went to that class.
You've talked about this class a few times, yeah. And when you've been helping other students as well, that class, you still remember it, don't you?
Definitely, up to this day. So I'm really grateful that I went. Most students usually say, oh, it's week 10, it's almost Christmas, I want to go home. So most people don't go to those classes. But if the lecturer is giving a class for that purpose of teaching you how to write a report, I think it's worth it that you go.
Okay. And do you enjoy writing reports?
I would say so. I would say that if I would have to write an assignment for a class, it would definitely be a report that I would prefer. Yeah. Mainly because it's like kind of detective work that you have to do with reports. You have to figure out what the data, what the numbers are telling you. It also, in my opinion, has a lot of a practical work to it because
a practical application.
Exactly. Yeah, because you are technically writing it for someone, let's say a decision maker, someone that needs to take action, perhaps in a company, and they will take action based on what you tell them. So that gives me that motivation to write the report and make clear conclusions about it.
Yeah, and I definitely agree. And that's one of the reasons I enjoy supporting students with their reports, because often there's a clearer applicability, perhaps a clearer sense of purpose or value, as opposed to some other kinds of assignments. But I think, so for our next question, we've heard a bit about your experience. And I wondered now whether you feel you've developed strategies for success in report writing, and do you have any ideas or recommendations to share?
Yeah, definitely. So in that case, I would say that the first thing that the students need to do is to understand perfectly what they are being asked to do. And this is usually found in the coursework brief. So what I usually do is I read it over and over again just to understand exactly what the objectives are, what they want me to do, what methods they want me to explore. And that is something that should be your first step when writing a report. If you are not understanding the coursework guidelines because perhaps something is a bit ambiguous, you can ask a friend, a colleague, or even you can clarify with your lecturer if they are happy to do so. Moving on, I would say that after that first step is done, I would start exploring sources. So sources being my previous university classes, to understand if the methodologies that I need to explain on my report have been taught before, or if perhaps I need to go further beyond the lecture slides and I need to go into different books that sometimes the lecturers recommend. And they don't recommend them in vain. They actually do it in purpose so that you can go ahead and explore them and write them on your report.
Yeah, I think that's great, Rafael. So it's about understanding the task, but also the kind of parameters or boundaries. Yeah. So whether this is quite an enclosed small task or whether there's an expectation of relating it to other things and going beyond what's in the assignment brief.
Definitely, yes. And then, of course, all of the structure you need to keep in mind for your report. Those are, in my opinion, free marks because it doesn't matter what you write, but as long as you have an executive summary, a good structure, you're respecting the word limit, the page limit, you can get some marks from that. So that always helps a student.
Okay,
Yeah.
great. And we're going to go on to talk about structure a bit more later. And just to pick up on one thing you said there, Rafael, so you talked about word counts and page limits. And it's perhaps just worth noting here that essays usually just have a word limit, don't they? But sometimes reports have a page limit, don't they? So you're given a page range or a word limit. They can be both, can't they?
Definitely, yeah.
So moving on to our next question, and this is particularly thinking about data, and it could be all kinds of data, Rafael. But when it comes to presenting that data in a report, perhaps particularly thinking about quantitative data, what are the key things that you think about?
So in that case, I think that based on my experience as a writing mentor, most of the students that come to us, they have a hard time with this. They usually think that the numbers that they achieved are already enough to explain by themselves what's being asked. But in that case, I would say that it's in the student. You have that responsibility of explaining to the reader what the number means. So for example, if you present a graph, it would be good that you make it very easy for the reader to read. So label the axis, put a title to it. Or for example, think about it this way. Is the pattern or the data that the graph is showing, is it explanatory by itself? Usually I don't think so. I think that you need to explain it on your own words to show that you understand the figure. Most of the time, the lecturers understand what the graph says because they have done that work multiple times, but they want to see if you understand it. And that's the key difference between getting higher grades and getting lower grades on your reports. I would say that as well, it's important to not only present the data, but explain it very well. So here is where you can get your critical thinking skills and your notes. And those are the marks that the words critical thinking, you always see them on the top tier, top end range of the mark scheme. Usually those reports that get a first or a distinction are the ones that have that critical thinking skill.
Okay, yeah, thank you. And again, we definitely see this with students who we're supporting, don't we? So a student might come with a graph or a chart and they feel like it's very obvious what it's trying to demonstrate. But for someone coming in with an external perspective, often those graphs, they either need a bit more explanation or just a bit of rethinking in terms of clarity.
Definitely, yes.
Yeah. And I wonder, Rafael, just in terms of that, you talked about talking about the data and that's where you can bring in your critical analysis. Do you have any tips there in terms of how do you do that? Do you have any kind of data commentary structures that you follow or anything like that?
So usually I would first start, let's say that I post the graph on the report. I would then continue by saying, okay, figure 1, figure X, displays, etc. And you will explain what the figure is showing. If it's showing the total sales of a company by month, explain that. It's showing the total sales of this company by month from, January until June of 2025. And then it's where you go into the data itself and you explain what it means. So if there was a peak in sales in June, explain what it means. Say, as you can see, there is a peak in the sales in June, and this is a reflection of, for example, the summer peak, which makes a lot of people go out and, etc., consume more, let's say. So I think that's what usually you want to show, that critical thinking, that explanation. And that's how you should structure most of your paragraphs on reports. You outline the data that you are talking about. You explain briefly what it says, what it's showing, and then you continue and explain exactly what this means to the company or to the clients that you are writing this report for.
Great. And I think that will be really helpful for any students listening. And for me, particular things I heard there. So starting with perhaps a general sentence or commentary on what the data shows, but it was still specific. So, you mentioned a date, still with that element of specificity, and then offering a bit of analysis or commentary on an interesting trend or something which probably relates to the overall task of the report. Great. Okay, let's move on to our final question for this podcast, which is just part 1 of 2. And that's about structure. So we've already talked about it a little bit, but Rafael, how do we know how to structure a report? How do we break it into sections with subheadings? And how do we know that our structures are working?
That's a very good question, because usually that is what most students as well have a hard time. Sometimes they're not really lucky with knowing what a structure of a report should look like, or they weren't taught about this. So it's very important that we make some emphasis on the structure of reports, which definitely differs from the structure of an essay. So I would say that first off, every single report, at least the ones that I have written, usually they expect an executive summary. So this is your first page, usually the page that comes after the title page, for example. And in this page is usually just in one page. That's how most lecturers want it and companies want it. You briefly explain the motivation behind the project in one paragraph. You explain what methodologies were used, very briefly. And then the most important part of this executive summary, you explain the outcomes. What did we find from the data? What did we find from the methodologies we used? What were the limitations of the research? And finally, the recommendations. So based on all of the outcomes and all of the things that we found out from the data, what do we recommend these end clients to do from here? Usually the main purpose of the executive summary is that, let's say you are working for a company and you're doing this for a company. The executive summary is mainly aimed to be read by an executive, usually a person that is not very technical and they don't care much about the technical analysis, but they really care about the outcomes. So you do need to explain that aspect. And usually they don't have a lot of time because they are executives in companies and they are very busy. So that's the theory behind the executive summary. Moving on, I would say that you can as well include a table of contents, but as you said, Sarah, you do have sometimes page limits. Mm-hmm. So you do need to check with the teacher if a table of contents would still count towards the page limit or not. I think that if it doesn't count to the page limit, I would definitely include it, because why not? I mean, it can definitely help you structure your essay. It makes it look better. And definitely, I think it adds that hint of professionalism.
Yeah, and it is just particularly useful for longer reports, right? It's a navigational tool for the reader, which again relates to thinking about producing something which is concise and easy to read for the target audience. Yeah,
definitely, yeah. And then moving on from the table of contents, we have, of course, the introduction. Here is where you can explain much more what who the project was for, the motivation behind doing it, etc. And then, of course, I would move on to the main body. And this is where I would say the meat and potatoes of your report are. Here are where you will get most of your marks, because you will need to explain in different subsections what methodology you used. Perhaps did you use Python, the programming software, to carry out analysis? Or did you use Excel or other softwares? Why did you do certain methodologies? You need to explain why did you choose them. Once you have cleared that aspect of choosing that certain methodology, you need to go into explaining what the data means, what the outcomes you got from the methodologies you used. Then what does this mean for the company? All of that goes into your main body. Finally, you could have a recommendations section where you recommend, based on all the outcomes, what was recommended for the company. It's also important to include that limitations to the research. This is, I would say, very important to achieve higher marks, because it's very important to reflect on what you've done. And it's very important to show a lecturer that you are aware that perhaps this is not perfect, but most reports have a limitation section, and you do need to show that you are aware of this. And then moving on, you do have the conclusion, the references, and finally an appendix. But I would put a question mark on this because it really depends on your report.
Okay, thank you. And in part 2 of this podcast on report writing, we're going to be looking at appendices in a bit more detail. But I want to thank you for listening today. Thank you very much, Rafael, for sharing so many really insightful experiences. And please do look out for part 2 of this podcast on report writing. Thank you.